If you've been following anybody on BookTube for a while, you will probably know that the Goodreads Choice Awards are a pretty big deal for some people on here. Since I am specifically focused on mystery and thrillers, I watch a lot of content for people who are either just reading the mystery thriller category or who are reading from every category and setting challenges for themselves to guess which books will be nominated, read several, if not all, of the nominations if they haven't already read them in several categories, and then guess which ones are going to make it into the finalists, at least read those that are going to be in the finalists, and then commentary on the winners every year. And I also see a general sense of regret often over the winner in the mystery thriller category from most of the people that I follow who are doing challenges like this. Now, it's completely understandable why we all focus on this award. It is open to everyone. Anyone can vote in it. You don't have to prove that you've read the book, so it can be a popularity contest. And you don't have to pay anything to vote. You don't have to attend anything to vote. It makes total sense. But I'm not going to do a video on, are these books the best, really the best of the year? Because I think we all know that they're not. So what I'm going to do this year is focus on the awards that are not as easy to vote in, but are probably better reflections of the best mysteries published over the previous year. So for the first video in this series, I'm going to talk through the nominees for the next award that's going to be awarded, which is the Lefties at Left Coast Crime. Left Coast Crime is a mystery convention that is held every year somewhere on the left side of the United States. In previous years, it's been held in Seattle, Portland, even Alaska. I've attended it 3 times over the years: Pasadena, Seattle, and Portland. And I had been thinking that I would go to Denver for this year's awards, but now I'm not going to be able to. So the awards happen in about 3 weeks, and the process is that you have to be attending Left Coast Crime to be able to vote. So obviously taking out all those people who vote in the Goodreads Choice Awards, because unless you're attending, you don't get a vote. It is a pretty significant investment to be able to vote in the Lefties. You have to pay to register for the conference, which was $379 for a reader attendee. You have to travel there, potentially have to pay for lodging, food, transportation, etc. So if you're not that invested in the mystery thriller genre and want to attend these things regularly, you're not going to make the investment to go, therefore you're not going to be able to vote. But you can still read all of the nominees and do exactly what we do for the Goodreads Choice Awards, which is decide what you would vote for if you were able to vote, and then watch and see who wins. The process for the Lefties is that the vote actually occurs during the course of the 3 days of the conference. So you arrive, you walk up to the table to get your badge that you've registered for, and they give you a ballot. And you then complete the ballot, turn it in, and the first full day of the conference, they are tabulating all of the ballots, and they give the awards on Saturday night at the conference banquet. There are 4 categories of Lefty awards. Awards are given for Best Humorous Mystery, Best Historical Mystery, Best Debut Mystery, and Best Overall Mystery Novel. This year, the date of the banquet is March 15th. That is a little bit more than 2 weeks from today. So because there are, at a minimum, 5 books in every category. I think 2 of them have 6 books. There is no way I'm going to finish that many books in the next 2.5 weeks. So what I've decided to do is just read the first chapter of the nominees and see how I enjoy the writing. And then completely unscientifically base my potential vote, if I was attending, on reading the first chapter. And then I'm going to go through and finish the actual winners and rate them. Now, because of the way my brain works, I can't read series out of order. And you will see as I go through the list that there are several books that are the latest entry in significantly long series. And I'm not going to read every book in the series to get to the current nominee. So unfairly, I'm going to be basing my ranking on where I am in the series instead of the book that's actually nominated, which makes absolutely no sense, but this is my channel and I can do whatever I want to do. And honestly, if I paid to go, I could vote for whoever I wanted to anyway, and I wouldn't have to prove that I read the book. So it is what it is. When I pull up the website, the first category is Best Humorous Mystery. I do not have all the books yet. They have not arrived. So I'm not going to start with that category, which is another thing that makes my brain hurt. It doesn't matter. I tell myself it does not matter, but my brain says it matters, and she has control. So I'm going to skip to the historical category because that is the category that I have all the books for. So the nominees for Lefties for Best Historical Mystery are Hall of Mirrors by John Copenhaver. That is not the first in the series. So first in the series is The Savage Kind. So I will be reading the first chapter of The Savage Kind. The next nominee is A Killing on the Hill by Robert Douaihy. Next is An Art Lover's Guide to Paris and Murder by Dianne Freeman. I have read the first in the series. I will be basing my judgment on A Lady's Guide to Gossip and Murder, which is the second in the series. Again, not scientific, but this is my channel and it can do whatever I want. Really, really stretching disbelief, the next nominee is The Lantern's Dance by Laurie King, which is in her Sherlock Holmes and Mary Russell series. This series has gone on for decades. The first book was published in 1994, 30 years ago, and we're still going. So I'm reading the first in the series, The Beekeeper's Apprentice, and this is literally my paperback that I have had for 30 years. And the final nominee in the historical category is Death of a Flying Nightingale by Laura Jensen Walker. I'm going to start there, read the first chapters, give you my feedback and who I would vote for. And then hopefully my books in the other categories have arrived and I can just move on from there. All right, so the first book that I'm going to pick up for the historical lefties is The Savage Kind by John Copenhaver. Now, this book has a prologue before it gets into the first chapter, so I do feel like I need to read the prologue on chapter 1. So if any of these books have a prologue, I'll do the same thing. I'm done with the first chapter of The Savage Kind and the prologue in the first chapter. And this is a really long chapter. It's almost 50 pages long, so this might have a little bit of an unfair advantage against the other books if the chapters are not quite so long, because I've obviously read quite a bit of this book at this point. 50 pages out of it is 350 pages long, so not as much as I thought. So this is not the book that is nominated. Again, this is the first in the Nightingale trilogy, and the book that is nominated is the second in the trilogy, so the next in the series. I definitely do not think that you would want to read them as standalones from from the backstory, from all of the character development that we're getting, if this is going to follow our main characters, which I imagine it would through the trilogy, based upon what it's called. The story is told in the girls' diary entries, and they are not necessarily alternating one-to-one. So we may have 2 diary entries from one of the girls and then 1 diary entry from the other girl, and then we may go back and forth. To help keep it straight, the entries are even printed in different fonts, so you know when you're switching from one to the other. I don't usually love dual narrative, but I understand why Copenhaver is doing it. So our prologue is written in 1963, and one of the girls is writing the prologue, but she doesn't fill us in on who she is. And she admits in the prologue that they were very close friends as teenagers, and they solved a mystery together, but they also killed someone together. And that is the story we're going to get. And then we will eventually find out who this prologue narrator is. So our main characters are Judy and Philippa, and we jump back to 1948, and Philippa and her family have just moved from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. Her father is a Navy lawyer, and her mother died in childbirth, and he has remarried. She has a stepmother who she's got an okay relationship with. Judy was adopted by a very wealthy family who owns a chain of drugstores, but she doesn't really feel like she belongs with them. And she talks about changing her name as soon as she turns 18 so that she can be her own person. Now they have an English teacher. Both of them are obsessed with literature. They have an English teacher. Her name is Miss Martins, and there is definitely a sense of an odd dynamic there. I don't know if you can hear it, but something is driving Poppy crazy outside, and she is clawing at the door. And I just want to get through this. Are you done? Are you done? Settle down for just 1 minute while I do this. But she's teaching the girls Keats, and one of the poems that she teaches them is Ode to a Nightingale, and Judy decides that she's going to change her last name to Nightingale. So here we are already at the naming convention for the trilogy. There is a boy in their class named Cleve who makes it very, very clear that he does not like Miss M and he does not like Judy. And Judy happens upon him one day being very threatening to Miss M in the hallway of the school. And there at the crux is, I think, what we're going to explore. Why does he hate them so much? Why is he threatening Miss M? What is going on there? I do have to admit, I'm completely sucked in. I really loved the first chapter. I do think that there are some odd phrasing, editing things going on in it, and it is extremely long. It's an extremely long chapter, so if you don't like that, be aware of it. But for the first one of the nominees, I think it's setting a really high bar. And again, I know that this is not the actual book that's nominated, but based upon Copenhaver's writing, I really am enjoying it, enjoying the story. So I want to see where this goes. So this could be already the top contender. The one last thing that's really odd about this is that Philippa gives her birth date and the fact that she's a Cancer, and she was born in 1931, and they're in high school in 1948, and that is almost exactly my mom's age. So I just keep thinking about the fact that my mom was probably nothing like this when she was a teenager. Anyway, it's just a weird that she's almost exactly the same age as my mom was. So I just keep picturing my mom as a teenager and pictures of my mom as a teenager when I'm reading this. And she's describing outfits and haircuts and things like that. So it's just an interesting point of view for me to have. All right. The next that I'm picking up is Robert Douaihy's A Killing on the Hill. Okay, after the first chapter of A Killing on the Hill by Robert Douaihy, it's 1933. We're in the middle of the Great Depression, and William Schumacher, who graduated from high school a year before, so basically still a teenager, a cub reporter, has moved from his native Missouri to Seattle to make his way. And one night, late, he gets a call that could be his big break from the chief detective of Seattle to meet him at a crime scene that is potentially a gangster shooting. So, of course, Shu scurries there rapidly. And when he gets to the crime scene, he finds that the victim is a former prize fighter. And this occurred at a social club. And the owner of the club is the potential gangster. I don't have any criticisms about the writing. I think that we got just enough information about Shu in the first chapter really masterfully to organically understand why he's in Seattle, what he's trying to do with his life, and this is his big break. I'm sure that through the course of the book, we're going to have some naive moves made by him because he's so new to reporting, to having a career, to working with the police. But that also gives us opportunities for us to learn as well and get a lot of the background of how a case in 1933 would be investigated. So I can definitely see why this one is on the list. Okay, after the first chapter of A Lady's Guide to Gossip and Murder, I think this is a great, cozy, historical series, but reading it after the Copenhaver and the Douaihy, I don't think it can compare. It's 1899. We are with the Duchess of Harley, Frances, who is American born. She is one of those wealthy Americans who came over and married nobility. The only problem now is that after her husband's death the previous year, both his family money, which he didn't have any, which is why he married her, so his family has no money, and his younger brother now has the title, and her family fortunes are lagging as well. Now, here are some of the reasons why I also don't think I would vote and why this won't win. We're dumped into a setting in the first chapter of this novel where a lot of characters are introduced, and if you have not been following along, if you hadn't read the first in the series, you're not getting a lot of information, like who are these people, what's going on. We hear, this is my friend, she has a brother, this guy was a good friend of my husband, and there's so many characters, there's so many names initially with just like one line of, this is my husband's friend, this is my sister's friend. There's nothing to really differentiate them. There's no real character development going on there. So I don't think the writing that I'm seeing in the second book in the series is quite at the same caliber as, again, the Copenhaver or the Douaihy. I also would say there's a spoiler for the first book immediately in the second book. So where often there's a reference in series to events of prior books, I felt that this was more spoiler heavy. So you would have to read everything in the series to not be spoiled. So two reasons why you would have to read the first in the book: to understand who these people are and to not have the spoiler. So just difficult to pick up as a standalone. And I do think, even though I don't ever do that, a lot of people aren't bothered by that. And so there's quite a bit here that I think would make it difficult and detract from it. I know from listening to the first book in the series that Frances has these many troubles. that is not established in the first chapter here. So we don't know why her friend Fiona makes a reference to be careful, or people are going to whisper that you're working as a matchmaker. She really is working as a matchmaker. So it would almost be contradictory if you didn't know the first book in the series. You would pick it up and go, oh, she's not working as a matchmaker. Well, really, that was an ironic statement from Fiona because she is working as a matchmaker. So Frances has potentially made a match between a gentleman who's a little socially awkward and a widow. And they're at a garden party, and this man approaches her and says, hey, that match is not going to work. So if there's anybody else you can match me with, I would appreciate if you set that up. And she's stunned, and she asks him what happened, what's going on? Why isn't it a match anymore? And he won't tell her. So she tries to get the information from him, telling him, how am I supposed to make a good match for you if you won't tell me why this one didn't work? And he really will not explain to her. He just keeps saying, it's not a good match. It's just not going to work out. So she and her aunt and her younger sister and her younger sister's friend, who she is also chaperoning for money, is there to make a match potentially as well, get back in their carriage after the garden party, and her aunt is reading the newspaper and shares with her that this widow who Frances was trying to broker this match with, she's actually been murdered. And so that's probably why he thinks it's not a match anymore, but he didn't tell her that the woman was dead now. So interesting concept. I will definitely read the book. I do want to continue on with the series, but as far as voting for this one as an award winner in historical mysteries, I don't think this is the strongest in the category, so I wouldn't vote for this one. I can see why so many people love this series after only reading 30 pages of it. It has a really unique setup. The very beginning is an editor's note from Laurie King explaining that she was just at home one day and UPS delivered this huge old-fashioned trunk to her home with no note, no sender information. It just arrived. It contained a bunch of items, including fabulously expensive sapphire necklace or emerald necklace. I can't remember which one now. And all of these manuscripts. And after holding on to them for a really long time, she basically needed to publish something. She's running out of money. And so she rewrote a manuscript. She sent it to her publisher, explained how she got these manuscripts, signed a bunch of waivers with the publisher's lawyer to make sure that everybody understood that she was only editing the manuscripts. She did not write them. And then here they are for the world. And she's not really sure if it's fiction or if it's fact, although they are presented as fact. And next we get an author's note from Mary Russell, who explains that she wrote these manuscripts. She's in her 90s now, and they are based upon her relationship with Sherlock Holmes, who is a real person, and she wants to explain the Holmes that she knew and how he was different than the Holmes that Watson portrayed in his stories. And she then goes on, we jump back in time. It's 1915, and Mary is 15 years old. She meets 54-year-old Sherlock Holmes, who has been retired for over a decade. And as soon as she meets him and he is observing some bees, she quickly relates to what he's doing and explains to him what he's doing before he can explain it to her. And he's immediately taken with, this is someone who thinks the way that I do. She's able to deduce some things about him based upon paint and his handkerchief, and he's very, very impressed. So he invites her back to his home for tea. And when they get to his house, he's had time to observe her. And he is, very, very smartly, the way that King does this, he is able to deduce all of this background information about Mary's past that we then, the reader, get as our introduction to her and her character. So Mary, her father was American, her mother was British, and 2 years before, the father had moved the family back to California, but then they were involved in an accident, which has left Mary scarred, and her parents have both been killed. And now she has been placed under the guardianship of her aunt, her mother's sister, who really is just after Mary's inheritance and is horribly cruel to her. So sort of your typical Victorian, but it's 1915, so we're not in the Victorian era anymore, but still what I would traditionally say is sort of Dickensian orphan narrative going on. And Holmes obviously feels very sorry for her that she doesn't have a parental figure. She's being neglected to the point that her aunt is actually withholding food from her when she misbehaves. And so she's starving when she gets to Holmes's cottage, and Mrs. Hudson is there working as his housekeeper, and she feeds Mary, and he invites her back whenever she wants to come and visit and to have philosophical conversations. She is studying for entrance exams. She wants to attend college. She wants to be a theology major. Her mother was Jewish, and this is very important to her. But he sees this great deductive mind and wants to foster it. Now, I have heard that there are problematic aspects to Mary and Holmes's relationship. Not sure if it happens in this book or if it happens later in the series. Obviously, there's a monumental age gap, and from what I've read so far in 30 pages, there is nothing inappropriate. He is more of a mentor figure to her. However, that might change. That might become inappropriate. I'm not sure. I'm basing this on 30 pages and King's writing. And I will say that I'm more interested in the Mary character than her relationship with Holmes. I think her relationship with Holmes, to me, at this point, after an editor's note, an author's note, and a first chapter, is that she is keeping up with Holmes. Her deductive reasoning is just as strong as his, and he actually is making excuses that he's out of practice, he's been retired for 10 years, he doesn't do this every day, and he's getting older. He's only in his mid-50s, but still, he's not as young as he once was. He's not as nimble as he once was. So if I'm just looking at it from the perspective of Mary being a really interesting character and from King's writing, I would say that this is probably at the top of my list at this point, probably because I'm biased towards female authors and a female main character. I know Copenhaver has a female main character, but it's written by a male author. So, and I also love a good Holmes pastiche. And I think this is one, I will say that his sympathy, his empathy towards Mary is a little uncharacteristic. And so I do think that may be sugarcoating it a little bit. But I think my vote, at this point, my vote would go to King. All right, my thoughts on the last in the historical category, Laura Jensen Walker, Death of a Flying Nightingale. This is not Walker's debut novel, but it sort of comes across as a debut novel. So it is 1944. It is just after D-Day. And we are introduced in the first chapter to Maeve Fitzgerald, who is an Irish woman who has joined the Royal Air Force as a nurse, a flying nightingale, after the death of her fiance. And although the Irish were not required to serve, he had enlisted and died in battle, and she then feels compelled to become a nurse. We are given a view of her flying into Normandy on a rescue mission, basically after D-Day, to pick up a plane load full of injured men. She's by herself. She's the only nurse on the flight, and she's taking care of 24 severely injured men, flying them back to England for medical care, and also being shot at, because since the plane is carrying supplies, it cannot be branded as a Red Cross flight, and so it's just another British military plane. So she's going in facing shrapnel, could be shot down, taking care of an extensive number of men on her own with no doctor on board. And Walker does a good job of explaining the perils of being a flying nightingale immediately in the first chapter. When Maeve gets back from her mission, she's in her barracks, she's sleeping, she wakes up, she hears something, she goes outside, she stumbles upon two people having a tryst in the dark. She's very embarrassed. She goes back to bed, and a little while later, one of her barrack mates, Sally, sneaks in, and Maeve, who considers Sally a flirt, but a good nurse, just figures it was her out there in the dark with somebody. That's all we get in the first chapter. It's pretty brief, not a lot of development there other than setting up the scene for what a flying nightingale goes through and who Maeve is, why she's there. I don't think Maeve is going to be the sole protagonist in the narrative. The synopsis on the back refers to Maeve, Etta, and Betty. So perhaps this is a trio of nurses who are going to be investigating. And I'm making an assumption, since Sally is not mentioned in the synopsis on the back, that maybe she's the victim. Maeve's pretty uptight. She's a little judgmental. And I might really love Etta or Betty. I haven't met them yet, though. So for what I've got out of one chapter, it just did not grab me, and I would probably rank this the lowest on my list. So for Best Historical, my vote would go to King. However, I do think that Copenhaver is going to win. So we will see when the winners are announced next week. The next category for the lefties that I'm going to be going through is Best Humorous Mystery. And going into this, I'm just going to be completely real. This is a category where I don't expect to like any of these books. I am extremely critical, and it's very hard for me to like a humorous mystery. I was shocked that I liked Finlay Donovan as much as I did. So I'm hoping that there will be another Finlay Donovan type book in this category, but I'm not holding out hope. So the nominees in this category are A Very Woodsy Murder by Ellen Byron, Ill-Fated Fortune by Jennifer J. Chow, number 4 in the Hammerhead Jed mystery series, Bronco Buster by A.J. Devlin. Since I have not read any, I will be reading the first chapter out of the first in the series, Cobra Clutch. Number 7 in the Last Ditch mystery series by Catriona McPherson. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Scotzilla. but I will be reading the first chapter from Scot-Free, the first in the series. The second in the Hayden McCall series by Rob Osler, Cirque du Soleil, but I will be reading the first chapter in the first in the series, Devil's Chew Toy. And finally, the one that I'm really hopeful for, Richard Osman, We Solve Murders. Okay, I finished the first chapter of A Very Woodsy Murder, and very pleasantly surprised. This one probably would have my vote for personal reasons. We've been introduced to Dee, and Dee is trying to persuade her friend Jeff to become her business partner and purchase a motel with her called the Golden Motel, which is like a 1940s era motel in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So I live in the Sierra Nevada mountains, so it feels like the one closest to home. Byron describes the area as being part of Majestic National Park, which is probably meant to be Yosemite or one of the other national parks in the area that she's not calling out specifically by name, to be a little bit vague and to be able to play with her environment, probably landmarks and things like that. So Dee has been having a tough time. Her mother has died suddenly. She is getting divorced from her second husband, and she's realizing that at 40 she is aging out of her job as a TV writer. So she feels she needs a change. Jeff is in the tech industry. He's tired of the expense of living in the Bay Area and the stress of working in tech. So he quickly agrees that he will become her business partner and they will purchase this little motel, 10 rooms and 10 cabins together, and they will rent it together. Now, neither one of them has any experience in this industry, so I'm sure that we will be getting a fish out of water story. And he's from the Bay Area, she's from Southern California. They're moving to a very small town. I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of hijinks related to that as well. Now, as Dee is about to go call the realtor to place her offer, she hears what she thinks are footsteps, and she immediately has to tell herself, you're going to be safe here, you're going to be safe here. So there may be a little bit of backstory, something going on with Dee that we will find out about as well. I did like that this did not immediately try to be over the top funny. It just gives the situation and the nuances of it that are going to lead probably to comedy. And again, I really like this setting. I will be surprised if this one wins the Lefty though. All right, I started to read the first chapter of Ill-Fated Fortune and realized that I had already read the first chapter of Ill-Fated Fortune. I received an ARC of a book called, I think, Cozy Case Files from NetGalley last year. And it contained the first chapter of several different cozy mysteries to sort of entice you to pick them up. And I had read this first chapter in that and immediately remembered some of it, not all of it, but some of it from what I'd read before. So I just skimmed it. Our main character is Felicity. She works in her mother's bakery as the cashier. And this is a very unusual bakery as they only sell 2 pastries. And the reason that they only sell these 2 pastries is that these are the only recipes that Felicity's mother learned how to bake from her mother. There is a family tradition that they do not write their recipes down. You have to be taught how to make the recipes because these pastries contain magic. So when someone eats the pastry, they are filled with this sense of bliss. And so that's all they need to sell. These 2 items, people keep coming back because they get such euphoria after eating them. Now, up to this point, Felicity thinks that the magic has skipped a generation. She's never been able to bake anything that contained magic. But the day before the book begins, She has suddenly baked some fortune cookies the night before, and they contained magic. So it's almost as though maybe her magic wasn't in the 2 recipes her mom knows. She had to have her own recipe that she came up with to get her magic. So it is day 1 of her baking fortune cookies for the bakery and selling them to patrons. And one of her first customers buys a fortune cookie, eats it, walks outside, and falls in front of the bakery. I'm presuming that he will end up being dead, and we'll go on from there. So obviously this has some paranormal elements. This is the only book in this category that does. And it seems like a good setup for a cozy mystery. However, to be the best humorous mystery with some of the other writers in this category, I don't think that this book is anything special, and I wouldn't vote for this one, and I doubt that this one will win the category. The biggest surprise for me was Cobra Clutch. I did not read the synopsis, but based upon the fact that there's a picture of 2 guys wrestling on the cover, I was not surprised that our main character is a former wrestler. So the main character, Jed, is approached by his old friend, Johnny, whose pet snake, Ginger, has been stolen. And Johnny wants Jed's help getting Ginger back. Ginger is a part of his, I don't want to say act, and he drapes her around him as he's entering the ring when he goes in to do his wrestling. So yes, Jed is a former wrestler. That is how he knows Johnny. And he's currently working as a bouncer, but Jed's dad is a PI. And so Jed will help his dad out. And so Johnny has come to him thinking that he is a PI himself and can do this for him. Jed is very reluctant to take on the case, but he agrees because he owes Johnny for something that's been vaguely hinted at. I'm sure we'll find out what it is. Now, Ginger was stolen from the locker room while Johnny was in the shower, so it's obviously someone who has access to the facilities. And Johnny has received a ransom email asking for $10,000, and so Jed quickly surmises that it has to be someone who is also aware that Johnny has just received a small inheritance from his grandmother. I was really pleased by the writing, and I think that this has potential to be extremely humorous just because of, pet snake and wrestlers and theatrical drama, all of that. So surprised by it, but would it get my vote? No. Will it win? Hard to say, but I don't think so. Scot-Free was the hardest book for me to reach a conclusion on, simply because incredibly short chapter and not enough information, which immediately made it not get my vote because I hate short chapters. Our protagonist, who is unnamed, but we find out is a woman, is in a cheap room. I'm assuming it's cheap, like motel room, and there's shelling going on outside of the room. So much that she can smell gunpowder in the air. She's waiting for someone, so she's not surprised when someone starts pounding on the door, but she is surprised that they're pounding in such urgency. And then instead of being the person she's waiting for, the police identify themselves. So she opens the door and the police ask her, "Are you?" And then he seems to get stunned by the name, like he can't pronounce it, so we never hear what the name is. She's got her suitcase packed. She's eager to leave the country. They immediately spot this. She admits that she's waiting for someone named Mrs. Bombaro, and the police tell her that Mrs. Bombaro is in jail and her husband is dead. And then we find out the reason that there is shelling outside is because it's the 4th of July. So they're obviously in the United States. When a big firework explosion goes off, our protagonist jumps into the arms of the police officer. So that is, to me, like trying too hard to be funny. So I'm definitely not impressed with this one. Again, I know that this is not the book that's actually nominated. We are much further down the series. Maybe we get more by the time we get there, but based on the first chapter of the first in the series, I would not be voting for this, and I doubt that this one will win. Although I know Devil's Chew Toy is not the nominated book, Cirque du Soleil is only the second in the series, so we don't have 7 previous books that Osler has been practicing on by the time he gets to Cirque du Soleil. I think Devil's Chew Toy was pretty well regarded from a critical perspective, so I think this has the biggest opportunity of being a contender against the last book in the series. Now, our protagonist, Hayden, is a pretty self-described nerd. He's very short, 5'4", he's skinny, he's a ginger, he's a social studies teacher for 8th grade, and he's a podcast fanatic and a sometime blogger. And he's at the club, and he gets up the nerve to go tip a dancer, and this dancer, Camillo, accidentally kicks Hayden in the face as Hayden is trying to tip him, and kind of gives the impression that he breaks Hayden's nose, but he doesn't go to the hospital, so just, it's bad. So Hayden's sort of in the back of the club resting because the owner didn't want him to bring down everybody else's vibe, and Camillo gets off work and comes to check on Hayden, and Hayden is just overwhelmed because Camillo is gorgeous. So when Camillo asks if he wants to go back to his place, Hayden immediately says yes. And they go back to Hayden's house. They establish they're both 25 years old. Camillo is a part-time student, and Hayden is very impressed because Camillo is very clean and orderly, and he's seen some like really slobbish guys in his day, and so he's like, wow, this guy is gorgeous, he's neat, and he has a dog named Commander. So why Hayden keeps immediately starting like, why would this guy want to get to know me? Why would he be interested in me? I'm a little short nerd, and he's gorgeous, 6 foot tall Greek god, basically. Now, just judging off of the first chapter, the writing is good. There were some initial editing issues and proofreading issues in the book, though, which is just always something that just pulls me out a little bit. So just personal preference, I would say if there's a proofreading error on page 9. I usually see proofreading errors sort of after 100 pages in the book where a writer is just kind of tired of proofreading their own work, and it's the first book for them, so they're not getting the editing support from their publisher that bigger name would. So you start to see as they get tired, the errors come post 100 pages. To have a proofreading error on page 9, it's kind of a signal to me. But Hayden was engaging. I liked his, I wouldn't call it lack of self-confidence, but he's very aware of who he is and where he sits on the food chain. And Camillo's kind of an odd guy, though. He's the way he talks, he tries to be jokey, and Hayden can't really tell, is he joking or is this real? Is he kind of dumb? Like, does he know what I'm talking about? At one point, Camillo tells him, I may be a dancer and I may be good looking, and like country music, but I'm not a hick. But he kind of comes off like he's not that smart. So I don't know if that's for the comedy or if he's just trying to be, if that's his way of flirting. I don't know. For Left Coast Crime, for the Lefty, I feel like the Left Coast Crime voters may vote for Rob Osler. But the next book is the fan favorite, Richard Osman, We Solve Murders. So this book was extremely popular. It was the only book in the Lefties that was nominated for Goodreads Choice Awards, which is a huge popularity contest, much more so than the LCC voting will be. There is a very brief prelogue, so as I did with the historical mysteries, I read the prologue and then chapter 1. In the prologue, we are introduced to Francois Loubet, Francois Loubet, who is described as a high-end criminal, maybe a hitman. And then in chapter 1, we find out that Andrew Fairbanks, a relatively successful fitness influencer, has been found dead on a yacht off the South Carolina coast. He has been shot in the head and then thrown, sort of tied to a rope over the side of the boat so that sharks could get to him. So, ooh, pretty gruesome, but not described in gory detail, as Richard Osman does not do that. Osman's humor is a very dry humor in comparison to Osler or Devlin, who are sort of going for over-the-top comedy. I think we'll see some more farcical comedy from my other favorite, Ellen Byron, as well. And so from a dry humor perspective, which is what I actually prefer, also more polished writing because, hey, he's got the big publishers behind him. This is the first book in a new series, but not his first book, not his first bestseller. And having the popular vote, I would say that Osman has the best chance of winning unless the LCC voters vote for Osler. Osler and Osman, how confusing is that? But I personally would probably vote for Richard Osman, even though that's the popular. I'm not doing it just because it's the popular vote. I do prefer his type of humor, and he's a more polished writer. So my vote for Humorous is We Solve Murders, and I'm kind of cheating because I think either We Solve Murders will win or Cirque du Soleil will win at LCC. The next category is Best Debut, so these are obviously debuts. They're all the first. So I'll be reading the first chapter from each one of them. First up is Blue Ridge by Peter Malone Elliott. Next is Obey All Laws by Cindy Goyette. The Mechanics of Memory by Audrey Lee. Ghosts of Waikiki by Jennifer K. Morita. And You Know What You Did by KT Nguyen. I'm not gonna lie, this one is tough. I'm gonna talk through these and then make up my mind for which one I would vote for and maybe which one I think will win. Prediction? I don't know. For Blue Ridge, we are introduced to Gillian, who's driving home to Virginia to meet his brother Christopher. Christopher is a 3-time congressman, and everyone is saying that he's going to run for governor. And Gillian is living in Kentucky, and he's working for and sleeping with a married woman named Summer, and he's taking care of her horses. Cillian was, it's with a C, I'm sure if it's supposed to be Killian, but it's Cillian, we'll see, was an Olympic level equestrian until he was injured and hurt his knee. So now he's taking pain medication, but it's not clear if he's an addict or if he's just taking the medication as prescribed. But when he takes the medication, it reminds him of his true love, Audrey, but something bad has happened to Audrey. And we get that kind of in a preface that something bad has happened to Audrey. And at the end of chapter 1, he gets a gun out of his car to go practice shooting in the woods because he is planning on killing Christopher. So, morally ambiguous hero, tormented, not making the best choices in life, sleeping with his married boss, but seems like a super nice guy when he stops at a diner and the waitress tells him she's going to go be a movie star. He realizes what a long shot that is for her, and he leaves her all his cash as a tip, right? So he's this great guy, but he's very morally ambiguous. Not my favorite kind of story. Probably would not vote for this one. Next up, Obey All Laws. This one did get me from the beginning. 100 miles an hour from the very beginning. So Casey is a probation officer, and she has gone to meet a new parolee assigned to her, and his name is Javier. She's gone to his house to basically just tell him to call her to make an appointment for them to meet. So it's a little unclear why she's gone to his house on her own. And as soon as she gets there, he comes out of the house very aggressively to ask her who she is and why she's there. Now, this case was supposed to belong to Casey's cousin Hope, who is also a parole officer, but for some reason, Hope has reassigned the case to Casey. And when she explains to Javier who she is and that Hope is no longer on his case, he says something to her like, "Where is it? She's given it to you. Give it to me now." And of course, Casey doesn't know what he's talking about. And so he attacks her. And as he's attacking her, she's thinking about, I should have been carrying a gun. I should have brought police with me as a backup. I shouldn't have come to his house by myself. All these things. She tries pepper spraying him, but he seems immune to it, maybe because he's on drugs. And basically he's dragging her into his house, and she knows that if he gets her into the house, she's done for. But he has a fake eye, which pops out in their altercation, and she is able to stab him in his eye socket with her keys. As he's reacting to this, she starts running, and she runs across the street. He's following her, and he gets hit by a car. Yeah, that was how it started. And now I'm assuming that, she'll go back and she'll be mad at Hope, and she'll have to figure out what's going on and what Hope is involved in. That was Obey All Laws. The Mechanics of Memory starts with a preface introducing us to Hope and her husband Lucas, or Luke, and they seem very much in love. He's an author, but he's got a job, and he's about to be in a TV interview, and she's very proud of him. He's very excited, and everything seems great. In the middle of the night, she gets a text message from Luke's teenage daughter, Charlotte, asking if they can go to an all-night diner and hang out because they're very close to each other. So Hope takes Charlotte to this diner, and they're talking about school and boys and all these things, and how Charlotte is frustrated with her mother. Obviously, she's Luke's from a prior relationship, and Hope is just a very good friend to her. But then in chapter 1, it's a year later, and Hope is in an institution where the doctor is telling her that she has to go through a treatment called the labyrinth in an attempt to get her memory back. And she's not sleeping. He gives her a very high dosage of drugs, and she's very reluctant to take them. She keeps asking everybody that she interacts with if she has any messages, if anybody has tried to get in touch with her, and they keep telling her, no, nobody's reaching out to you, nobody's trying to talk to you. There's another patient, a young man named Spencer, and Spencer has drawn this really elaborate chalk mural on the walls of his room of a forest and these paths, and Hope asks him about them, and he's talking about souls and cleansing souls and things like that. So don't know where that's going to go yet. And when Hope gets back to her room that night, she is journaling, but she is writing in code in her journals in case anybody is trying to read her journals. So we're not sure if this is just paranoia or if this is something that they're actually doing. And basically, she's lost a whole entire year. She doesn't know what happened from the time that that night occurred and that was in the preface to her being in this institution. So she's trying to unlock that. Happy. She's trying to unlock that. As I was scanning this book into my Bookly app, I saw that above the barcode, it is identified as science fiction. So interesting that this is nominated for Best Debut Mystery when the publisher is identifying it as science fiction. So I guess it's a speculative mystery, which may or may not be to my liking. Other thing I noticed, which is very similar to what I said, I think it was about Cobra Clutch. There were some proofing issues very early on page 2 in this one, which again, I'm like, could see it after page 100, but on page 2 to have some grammatical errors and proofreading errors doesn't strike me as a good sign. So not going to vote for this one. The Ghosts of Waikiki, we are introduced to Maya and her best friend, Lainey, who actually calls Maya the Ghost of Waikiki. And that is because Maya has left Hawaii to live in California and she has avoided coming home for years. But now she's home because she has a job to do. And then in chapter 1, we see Maya going to the home of Mr. Hamilton, which is a huge mansion. And when she gets there, the housekeeper tells her, oh, he's tied up on calls, you'll have to wait. She's very bothered by this because their appointment has been set up for weeks, but what can she do? So she goes for a walk in the garden. She ends up bumping into a man who looks like he's there taking care of some of the plants. And he asks who she is. She tells him that she is Hamilton's new research assistant because he's going to be writing a book about his family history. And then we are told, the reader is told, that this is all a story that's been concocted by the attorney who has hired Maya. So she's there for some other purpose and she's got a cover story. Thought this one was interesting. Very, very short chapter. Did get quite a bit of information for such a short chapter. Did have a preface, thank goodness, to get a little bit of that. But I felt like there just wasn't enough to sink my teeth into. And so this one is still behind Obey All Laws for me. Finally, the last in the best debut category is You Know What You Did. Now, I think I heard quite a bit about this book all last year. So this might have the popular vote if people are getting the name recognition that I got from it. But in the prologue, we meet Annie, and Annie is with her dead mother who is covered in blood and is holding a knife. And Annie says something along the lines of, we struggled, but I didn't mean to hurt you, which I don't know, isn't it an admission of guilt, or are we going to find out later that it's not? I don't know. So in chapter 1, Annie's teenage daughter, Tabby, is wanting to help arrange her grandmother's funeral, and Annie is telling her there's not going to be a funeral. And Tabby gets upset and kind of storms off, and Annie just writes it off to typical teenage angst. So Annie is an artist, and she's just about to be interviewed by a major publication, and Duncan, her husband, is trying to convince her that she should postpone it, that it's not a good time for this to happen. Now, Annie is desperate to have this interview go forward because she has done something in the past, and she feels like only by getting successful or having the success that this article is recognizing can she justify the thing that she did in the past. It might be something career related and not be anything, bad or illegal or anything like that, but she needs this interview to proceed. Now, the day that Annie's mom died, Annie called Duncan and asked him to come home, and when he got there, she asked him to help her move the body. And at first he said, no, we can't do that. But she convinced him that she would probably be charged, and she's very, very frightened, obviously. So he ultimately gives in and helps her move the body. So that is what we know after chapter 1. Still don't know how, did she kill her mom? Was it an accident? Did her mom do it to herself? We don't know, but Duncan did help her move the body. So I do think that maybe this will get the vote and win, but if I was voting, I'm going to stick with Obey All Laws, and I think my vote would go for that one. Okay, the final category for the lefties is Best Mystery Novel. The first nominee is Home Fires by Claire Booth, which is number 6 in her Sheriff Hank Worth series. And I will be reading the first chapter of the first in the series, The Bantam Beauty. Then, and I'm probably going to just slaughter this name, Margot Douaihy, Blessed Water, which is number 2 in the Sister Holiday Mystery series. And I will be reading the first chapter of the first in the series, Scorched Grace. Then Rob Hart, Assassins Anonymous. Leslie Karst, Molten Death. Served Cold by James Latoile, which is 3rd in his Nathan Parker detective series. And I will be reading the first chapter of the first in the series, Dead Drop. And finally, California Bear by Dwayne Swerzinski, which is a standalone. All right, the last category, and some would say the most important category, Best Mystery of the Year. Pardon my appearance. I'm just about to go out and have a facial, so there was no reason to put on makeup, and my hair is just going to get goopy, so did not bother to do that. And I have exactly 29 minutes to get all of this recorded. Right, instead of Home Fires, I read the first chapter of The Bantam Beauty. Sheriff Hank Worth is called to the lake. A paddle wheeler has run aground, and there are about 200 people still on board of it. And so he has to figure out, with all of the different emergency works departments, how they're going to get these people off the ship. It's mostly senior citizens, some are in wheelchairs, and it is the middle of winter. He and a few EMTs, first responders, go to the boat first, and when he gets there and he's surveying the scene, he's taken to the pilot house where he finds the pilot, Albert, who is seemingly impaired. And so he has to immediately call the EMTs for tests to see if Albert is drunk, under the influence, etc. I enjoyed the writing. I think that this will be a good procedural. Not sure what the mystery of this will be, other than the ship is run aground and Albert may be on something. But again, I think this is maybe the hardest one to judge best mystery of the year based on a previous book in the series. But just going off of Booth's writing, I don't think it's quite there for me. Next, for Blessed Water, I read the first chapter of Scorched Grace. Sister Holiday is working in the church, cleaning on a Sunday afternoon, and she takes a cigarette break, which she has to sneak, obviously, since nuns are not supposed to be smoking. But she's preparing herself because she thinks she's going to be reprimanded, because as the music teacher at the convent school, she knows that she's receiving complaints because the students feel that she is too tough on them. So she's sort of girding her loins to go in and face censure from the Mother Superior. Holiday has been there for about a year. From the sounds of it, it's not just that she's been in this location for a year. It sounds like she's only been a nun for about a year. She's covered in tattoos that the Mother Superior makes her cover, so she always has to wear gloves. She's got this large scarf that goes all the way up to her chin because she has throat tattoos, etc. And they are in New Orleans, and so it's extremely hot and humid. But she really enjoys being a nun. She likes being a nun. She's happy being a nun. She just doesn't like some of the nuns that she's there with. She knows that there's one who's kind of got it out for her, and she doesn't like these burdens of covering herself, etc. So she's standing out in this alley, she's sneaking her cigarettes, and all of a sudden she realizes that the school, which is across the street from the church building, is on fire. And as she's realizing this, the custodian is either pushed or falls from a second floor window, and he is on fire. So basically she runs across the street and she starts thinking about, could anybody else be in the building if this custodian was in there? So she goes in and she hears screams for help, and she's able to locate two teenage boys who are in the building. One has a very severe leg wound, and one is saying that his ankle is broken. So she makes a decision to help the boy who has the leg injury because he's losing a lot of blood, to help him out. And then as she gets him outside, the fire department, etc., arrives, and they're able to go in and rescue the second boy. I really liked this. I think that there's a lot about Sister Holiday that we still have to uncover. I think it's going to be intriguing to find out what's going on. Why did the school have to be set on fire, etc. So thinking I would vote for this one, but I'm a little conflicted right now. So I'm going to talk through the other ones and get back to this one. Next is Rob Hart, Assassins Anonymous. Our unnamed protagonist has just been attacked by an unnamed Russian in the basement of a small church where he has gone for some kind of addicts meeting. He tells us that he's out of practice, so he doesn't know if he can match the Russian in a fight. And so basically he ends up being stabbed by the Russian. I also like this one. So this is where the conflicting part of this comes in. I did not get as much as I got with Scorched Grace, but I'm intrigued because obviously by the title, Assassins Anonymous, is our unnamed protagonist a former assassin? He says the Russian recognizes him, and so is this a kind of a play on the hit out on the former hitman? So I do like this one as well. I think that this may be the popular vote I think there's one other that may be for the popular vote, but I seem to remember that this being a pretty popular book. I have not checked Goodreads for ratings on any of these as I'm doing this video. I should have said that the very beginning instead of saying this at the end, but I did not check Goodreads as I was preparing for my votes or for what I think will win, just doing it purely on which one I like and then previous knowledge of how left coast crime voters vote. Next, I read the first chapter of Molten Death by Leslie Karst. This makes me wish that instead of best humorous mystery category, LCC had best cozy mystery category, because I think it's doing a disservice to Leslie Karst to have her book in the same category with more serious formal mysteries. I don't think voters are going to vote for a cozy in comparison. So we have Valerie and her wife Kristen on vacation on the Big Island of Hawaii. They're staying with Kristen's friend Isaac, and the weather has not been very good since they've arrived. Valerie's kind of bummed out. This was their vacation and it's been raining the whole entire time. So Isaac tells them it's supposed to be a good day tomorrow, and he proposes that they go up into the hills above Hilo and look at the lava flow. So Valerie's not thrilled about getting up before dawn, but she agrees. And the next morning they get up and they trek up to the lava flow. Now Valerie is about to turn 60. The trip was supposed to be for a celebration of her birthday. Her wife is just retired, so this was a trip to celebrate her retirement. However, just 5 weeks prior to the trip, Valerie's brother died, and something happened. He owned a restaurant. She's been working for him part-time, and something happened when they were on their way home from one of the early morning markets. We don't know yet what that was. And this is weighing very heavily on her. She's still in the midst of grief. And we're told that this is taking a toll on their marriage, that they're not getting along, they've been bickering, etc. I wonder if maybe they were having problems because 5 weeks of grief. I don't know, there's something odd about a long-term couple, and if one of them is going through grief, why is their partner bickering with them? So there was just a little bit there that kind of made me raise an eyebrow at Kristen. But when they go up to see the lava flow, Kristen and Isaac sort of go off to wander around and take pictures and things like that. And Valerie is just living in the moment, watching the sunrise with the lava flow going down towards the ocean. And then she sees something that's a weird color by the lava flow, and she wonders what it is, so she goes closer. She realizes it is a green tennis shoe. She thinks that's odd. How did that get here? Then she realizes there's still a body attached to it. So I think that this is I definitely would want to read this book from what I've read so far, but would it get my vote as best mystery of the year? Probably not. And so this is another reason why I would say there should be a cozy category, and then it would be more of a level playing field. Hi, that's it. For Surf Cold, I read the first in the series, Dead Drop by James Latoile. This book makes me want to take back everything I've ever said about short chapters, because Latoile knows how to write a short chapter the way that it should be written. We're introduced to Billy, who is out scavengering, what is the word? You're a scavenger, so scavengering? I don't know. In the desert in Arizona, looking for anything that she can turn in for money to go buy a beer. And she comes across these 4 huge drums that have been dumped, had some brush put over them to camouflage them. And she thinks, well, this could be a score depending upon what's inside the barrel, or if it can be dumped out and I can just take the barrels for scrap. So she breaks open one of the barrels and she finds a dead body. And from a plot perspective, that's it. It was like 2-3 pages and we got all of that, but the writing was beautiful. And we get hints that Billy's got some bad things in her past. We don't know if those will play into the mystery, but there was just a ton here in a very short chapter and just beautifully written. I definitely want to finish this. I don't think I would use my vote on it though, unfortunately. And I don't think the voters will vote for this one. Could be wrong, but I don't think the voters will vote for this one, which is too bad. I really did like it, but it's good. It's in the category of Best Mystery of the Year, so I would hope I would like it and it would be well written. And then we get to California Bear. California Bear is a serial killer who was never caught. And now he has been dormant for years. He's 72 years old now, and he's living with his wife of 34 years, who he fantasizes about killing. Sounds like almost on the daily. And suddenly today, he just has gotten the urge again to go and kill again. And so he takes himself into his garage, he unlocks a trunk, and this is where he's been storing all of his souvenirs for years, and he's going through them. Another short chapter, not as bad as some short chapters I've read, but not as good as the way Latoile wrote a short chapter. So there's that. The other thing about this book, that because talking about my vote, and so I'm completely holding this against this book and will not vote for it. Can you see that blurb? Can you see who that's from? Yeah, that says James Patterson. Now, in his defense, Straczynski has been writing books with James Patterson recently. Gotta do what you gotta do to make a living, right? And in exchange for that, he got a blurb. Removing those things from the equation, this wouldn't get my vote because I just hate being in the mind of the serial killer. Of the killer, period, but especially the serial killer. So this would not get my vote. And I don't think we had the level of writing that we had in comparison to Rob Hart, or is it Douaihy? Douaihy? I'm really apologize. I know I am just mangling this author's name. Scorched Grace. So I would not vote for California Bear. Now, that being said, I do feel like this is the toughest one to call. We have these 3 books, and I think that of the 3, this was probably the most critically acclaimed, so might get votes from a name recognition perspective. I did see this one an awful lot of places, and so maybe Blessed Water would get it. And then this, good news is these books were remaindered. So maybe it wasn't that popular and maybe people won't vote for it. So I'm conflicted, but I think from a popularity perspective, I think Rob Hart, Assassins Anonymous, will win. But I think my vote would go to Blessed Water by proxy through Scorched Grace. So that's my vote. So that is it. I'm hoping to have this video up on Thursday, March 13th, which is the first day of LCC in Denver, and voting begins on Thursday as people begin arriving. The awards will be given out on Saturday the 15th, and as soon as they're posted, I will do a video comparing what I predicted and my votes with the winners. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see me actually read the winners, maybe read what I voted for if it didn't win, and then the winner, and then compare those two. Let me know, put it in the comments, and tell your pets I said hi. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.